Good evening, and welcome to the Hollywood Babylonians. Oh, hello, friends. This is your happy Hollywood history host, Mr. Ben Burke, here with another episode of the Hollywood Babylonians, your favorite classic film and Hollywood history podcast, in which we talk about the greatest classic films of old Hollywood and the history behind them. And today, we are talking about our seventh film on the Hollywood Babylonians. 7, can you believe it? We're really getting up there. And that is producer Arthur Freed's and Vincent Minnelli's 1944 Technicolor musical Family Valentine, Meet Me in St. Louis, starring Judy Garland, Mary Astor, Lucille Brimmer, Joan Carroll, Margaret O'Brien, Leon Ames, Harry Davenport, Marjorie Main, and Tom Drake, the boy next door, and on and on and on. And today I have joining me that wonderful actress, that wonderful songstress of the Broadway stage, off-Broadway stage, all over, and I think a lover of Judy as well, and that is my great friend, Ruby Rakos. Hello, Ruby.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, of course. I am so excited and so honored to have you on. How have you been lately?
I've been good. Not much going on in the theater world for me, but, I'm still here. I'm still kicking.
Well, that's okay. How much you're performing is not based on your self-worth. You're a wonderful human being no matter what you do. So I'm so glad that we finally got to record this episode because I feel like I messaged you over a year ago and was like, let's do an episode on Meet Me in St. Louis. And then life got in the way. And then a year later, and I messaged you, and then it was several weeks of I got sick and then you had something, and finally we're getting together and we're doing this. So I hope this goes well. I'm making sure that it's recording so we don't have to do it again. But anyway, I would love for you to, I've been talking a lot. So I would love for you to tell our audience kind of your background and how that led into your involvement with Judy and what you've done that has brilliantly depicted Miss Judy Garland.
Yeah, so I have played Judy Garland in a new musical about her childhood called Chasing Rainbows, The Road to Oz for almost 9 years maybe now, since I was in high school. And so it's a part of her life that's not widely explored or discussed since it's not as sensationalized as other parts of her life. But it starts with her at 6 years old, moving to Antelope Valley in California, and going to Hollywood, and then, jumps to her 12 years old, performing with her sisters as the Gum Sisters on the vaudeville circuit, and finally landing a contract at MGM, and eventually ends with The Wizard of Oz, with the filming of The Wizard of Oz. So it's only up through like age 16. And I think it's a part of her life that is really interesting. And I've spent most of my research on Judy focused on that earlier part in her life. So this is actually, I'm not as familiar with Meet Me in St. Louis or her life at that time as I would be, other movies. But it's still, I mean, Judy did say it was one of her favorite films, so I'm happy to talk about it.
Oh, yeah. And yes, I mean, anything that involves Judy Garland, I think she had a life like no other. But she had a life like no other. So whether it's little Judy when she first started performing, or whether it's Judy at 21, she basically, by the time she left MGM, she had lived 75 years compared to a lot of us for what she had done. I was just listening to the commentary on the Blu-ray that I have of Meet Me in St. Louis, done by the fabulous Mr. John Fricke, which I know I have not had that pleasure. So hopefully one day I will have the pleasure, but I don't know if there's anybody I've ever heard or read about, or anybody that loves Judy like John Fricke does. And he talks about her with such passion. And what I appreciate about him is that he doesn't over sensationalize her life, which I feel like so many people do, because she had such an interesting backstory.
Yeah, John is actually, he's our sort of resident Judy historian and consultant on Chasing Rainbows. And a friend of mine, I love him very dearly. I've been going through some of his books that I have to do research for this episode. So I definitely will be, will probably be quoting some stuff that he wrote. He is truly, his thing about Judy is that he's very protective of her, and he cares very deeply about her as a person, and to sort of boil her down just to the tragedy or the the negative things that happened in her life is really just kind of missing the whole point. So he's really wonderful.
Yes, he is. Well, yeah, he's awesome. Hopefully one day I'll get to meet him. But he was on a podcast recently called The Extras, and he was talking about Judy at 100th. Also, this is her 100th birthday this year. It was back in June. So, yes. And, but he was talking, he just talked about her. Like, I was like, there's probably her husbands probably didn't even love her as much as he did, and more than likely because the majority of her husbands were homosexual.
Yeah.
But
and he's seen her perform live too, which is insane.
He did?
Yeah,
okay,
I think he saw her twice, I believe.
Okay. Do you know? I guess that was in the 60s, more than likely, maybe in the 50s. Yeah. But yes, and yeah, it's amazing. After her film career, she went on to a very an amazing, prestigious career on the stage as a concert performer. And that's where she made and lost all of her money in her later years as well. But I was going to say, talking about like Judy, this is her favorite movie. She loved the ending sequences of the film, and this entire film is built upon sequences and vignettes in St. Louis when it's snowing and the family's together at Christmas time, because that reminded her of her childhood in Minnesota before her mother picked her up and threw her into California, and being with her father. And she loved that because it reminded her of the closeness of family and feeling good and feeling warm. And she never had that after she left, I don't think. But that she often referred to that as the happiest time in her life. So that's one reason why she said Esther Smith was her favorite role. So I wanted to ask you, I had a question on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember, about something about John Fricke. But so you talked about, I was going to ask Chasing Rainbows. So I wasn't sure because I knew that was a big deal at Paper Mill Playhouse right before the pandemic. And I was going to get tickets, but I couldn't because, we were introduced by a wonderful, wonderful person named Lacey Franklin. And she was like, you can get tickets at the last minute. It'll be fine. And then I tried to get tickets and they were like $500 and 3 left. And I was like, what happened? And it's because you're so talented and the show was so amazing. So is it still going on, or are there people behind it that are still trying to, I guess, plug it?
Yes, 100%. The pandemic did not kill us. That's for sure. There's a lot of really fun and exciting stuff coming up. I can't talk about it, but just keep an ear out.
Yes,
it's still here. It's still kicking.
Awesome. Amazing. That's so exciting. Yeah. And you had a spectacular cast in that as well. And I know a lot of us are very excited that it might one day go to the Broadway, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And that you'll be there to lead the way. But anyway, I wanted to now segue into the film that we're actually talking about, which is Meet Me in St. Louis. And do you remember the first time, what your thoughts are? General thoughts on this movie and Judy.
I've only seen this movie a few times. First time I remember seeing it was only a few years ago. Yeah, I think it was Christmas. I think I decided to watch it because, for some reason, everyone always says it's a Christmas movie. And so I was like, okay, I'll watch it. And it was on Christmas. And I'm watching the movie and I'm like, there's about, 30 minutes of it that's Christmas. I was like, oh, okay, it's not a Christmas movie. It just has one of the best Christmas songs of all time in it.
Right.
And so and the whole Halloween sequence is absolutely insane. Yeah, I don't know what my first impression of it was. Mostly that I was surprised that it wasn't a Christmas movie, probably. Yeah. Yeah, because I know a lot of people who it's their favorite Judy movie.
Right.
Whereas my favorites are usually her early stuff, where I just mostly don't think she's on screen enough in the earlier stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the music from some of the older films are in the show Chasing Rainbows, and I, sing them myself. So hearing them is always a joy. But I didn't realize there's not that many new songs in this show. I mean, we've got like The Boy Next Door, and the Trolley Song, and I think Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. And I think that's it for original music that was written for the show. Yeah. Oh, and Skip to My Lou, apparently. Ralph. It says it's Ralph Blaine. Also did the music and lyrics to Skip to My Lou. And then there's a deleted song that I have not found. It's called Boys and Girls Like You and Me. And she did go on to perform it in some places, so it's got to be around somewhere.
Yes. Well, on Boys and Girls, Boys and Girls Like You and Me was written by Rodgers and Hammerstein for Oklahoma, the Broadway show in 1943. Yes. And there's a lot of listening to the commentary by John Fricke, because he just knows everything about Judy. This movie had so many deleted scenes, and I think the original runtime was over 2 hours. And Boys and Girls Like You and Me was one of the things that got dropped, because Minnelli felt that, this film was one of the very first to kind of stray away from the movie musical formula, in the fact that it psychologically and emotionally furthered the plot and what the characters were feeling, and it gave you new information about how this plot develops. And he just felt like Boys and Girls Like You and Me was commentary on exactly what was going on. He was like, we don't need this, because this is, overstating.
Putting a hat on a hat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
one thing that Judy was very surprised by working with Minnelli, because this is the first time she's worked with him as a director. And she had said that that first scene with her sister,
Lucille Bremer.
With Lucille Bremer, he made her do it 11 times. Which up until that point, she's kind of known as like a one-take wonder, pretty much. She shows up, does it perfect the first time, and goes home. So she was very surprised and just thought she had completely lost her talent and her touch, because she was like, like, he made me do it over and over again. Like, was I really that terrible? And it turned out he really just wanted to get her out of herself and into the character of Esther, who is, significantly younger than her. And it's 1903. She's, 17 years old. So he was just trying to get her, more to be more natural. And once she sort of caught on to the way that Minnelli works and what he wanted from her, they had a great working relationship. And then obviously later, a marriage.
Yes. Yes, and that's awesome. I've heard about like the very first scene that Judy shot with Minnelli. She had been working with Charles Walters for several weeks, and he's the one that did really like the Skip to My Lou sequence, Trolley Song sequence, and Chuck Walters was a choreographer at MGM, choreographer and director at MGM, who also directed Easter Parade, funny enough, another film with Judy. But the very first day that she shot with Minnelli, I know that everybody was a little bit standoffish, because Minnelli had only directed 2 films at that point, which were I Do'd It and Cabin in the Sky, and both were successful for the studio, but they felt that he was too green. And Judy had always played, as I know you know, Mayer called her his little hunchback. She had always been this smart girl that wasn't pretty enough. Mickey Rooney really didn't realize that he was in love with her until the very last reel, because apparently she wasn't beautiful enough. She was the next door neighbor who had a very wry sense of humor. She kind of came out with a zinger. She had a great sense of humor, which I don't think many people realize. But up until Esther Smith, she had never played like the Lana Turner type ingenue at MGM. And I know that she really didn't want to play this role. And so she was saying all the lines with kind of a wink and a nod, particularly because, she thought the script was a little bit silly. Everybody did. And she also, it was just Judy's sense of humor. It was Judy Garland being Judy Garland. And it took her, I know they took several takes in the morning, and then Minnelli called for lunch, and then at lunch Arthur Freed came to see him and said, well, I've just talked to Judy, and she thinks she's lost her talent. She's absolutely heartbroken, which made Minnelli kind of distraught, and he was like, don't worry, I told her you know exactly what you're doing. So they came back, and it was a time before he completely got her to break down into that character, which I think is a really beautiful character because like we talked about, she'd never played the ingenue before, and this kind of beautiful type of leading lady, she had never done, and he was the one that first photographed her, framed her in beautiful composition and beautiful Technicolor. And then on top of that, Dottie Ponadell. Do you know who she is? Her makeup woman. So before Dottie Ponadell, I believe Judy was just, her makeup was done by the head of Metro's makeup department, which was William Tuttle. And she never was made to feel beautiful by William Tuttle. And Minnelli, somebody brought in Dorothy Ponadell, who had done makeup for a lot of people at this point. But Judy came in with all of these caps for her teeth and discs that she would insert into her nose to make her nose look different. And, all of these things was like, you need to do this to make sure I look like this on screen. And Dottie Ponadell said, no, you're a very beautiful girl. We don't need to do much. So she just raised her eyebrow, made her bottom lip very full, and then put white eyeliner under her eyes and put a very, very thin layer of base on. And she said, and she was Judy, and she was beautiful. And she plucked her hairline a little bit, but that's besides the point. So, but I think it was one of the very first times. And that's one of the reasons that I think Garland fell in love with Minnelli the way she did, because she had kind of a standoff. She didn't like exactly working with him because he was a perfectionist. Most people that see this movie are like, it is just Technicolor fluff. There's not much to it. Technically, it's an amazing, amazing film for the time, because so many of the shots are these great big swooping long shots throughout the house, throughout a 2-story structure that they built, and they built an entire street for this movie. What he does with lighting, Minnelli and the cinematographer, what they do with lighting, oh no, I've lost my thought again. But going into like Judy looking beautiful, it being technologically more advanced than other films, there is a lot to it. And then, we could talk about, so many people say there's absolutely no plot to this film, which I think for a war-torn America in 1944, there was definitely a plot to the film, which was, it came out at the absolute perfect time in November of 1944, because people were just exhausted by the war. They wanted it to be over. And to show a film, this is a type of film that, would show up these type of plots on television in the 50s and 60s. But at this time, people didn't have television. These were beautiful family sequences that were constructed very wonderfully by Minnelli and by everyone involved. And it touched America's hearts, I guess you could say, in a different way than it ever had before. And the fact that it broke away from the American musical film formula, and it gave people a new sense of what a musical could be, was one of the reasons that it was, I believe it was the most successful film musical that MGM had ever seen. Also, and it might have been the most successful film that MGM ever saw outside of Gone with the Wind. But what I was going to say about Judy and Minnelli, Judy seeing herself in the rushes and being like, oh, you actually shot me very beautifully, was that she did not like working with Minnelli because he was a perfectionist. She was known as a one-take wonder, and he would have them, like the dinner sequence at the very beginning of the film was an exhausting sequence, because he had to, there were so many things on the table. There were so many things around the room. They had to constantly be reset and reset and reset. And Margaret O'Brien, at 5 or 6 years old, kept constantly playing pranks on the prop master and messing everything up. And so they had to go back and retake and retake and retake. And Minnelli kept calling rehearsals for scenes like that, or like scenes like, it took a lot of rehearsal with the camera, with the dancers, with everybody to get that all put together. And Judy did not exactly like that. He had to keep, because Judy would would do like one rehearsal, then run off the stage, jump in her car. And he said he'd constantly have to call the policeman at the gate to intercept Judy and be like, no, we're not finished yet. But she didn't exactly fall in love with him until she saw the finished product. And then she trusted him as a human being and as a director. And then, of course, he went on to direct her in The Clock, which is one of her best, I think probably her best performance as an actress at MGM is in The Clock. And, from there on, it's history.
Yeah. I mean, I could understand why she, yeah, because since she was the one take wonder, she was also notorious for being late.
Yeah.
There's one story John Fricke writes about where they were waiting for her to record, I think it was The Boy Next Door or something. And they waited for her for 5 hours. And she shows up with her 2 little dogs 5 hours late. And they're like, oh, do you want to run through it once? She's like, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
And she does like one take and then it's like, you got it? And like leaves. And it was perfect. Like she didn't need the constant again and again and again.
All of that time.
Yeah. And there was a lot of sicknesses and absences during the filming of the movie. I mean, she herself was out for like a total of 3 weeks or so. And Margaret O'Brien was pulled out of the film at one point by her mother because she needed rest.
Right.
And Judy had actually, saw a lot of herself in Margaret O'Brien, because she was working when she was 5 too, in vaudeville. And so I think there's a quote about, how that little girl, she doesn't have a life,
right.
Like she doesn't get to have a childhood.
I think I heard Lucille Brimmer say that at one point, that Judy was very close to Margaret. And, they were all sitting around on set one day and she told Lucille Brimmer and the other dancers, it's very sad because she doesn't have a life. She's not a normal little girl.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes. And you were also talking about, what were you just talking about? You're talking about Margaret and, I was
being pulled out by her mother.
Yes, her being pulled out. So that's an interesting story because, okay, there's a book called Get Happy, The Life of Judy Garland by Gerald Clark. Have you read Get Happy?
I believe that is one of the, I don't think that's the one I read all the way through. I think that's the one I stopped after The Wizard of Oz. Well, there's a few biographies where I just stop at The Wizard of Oz and don't read the rest of it. I
don't blame you. First of all, because I feel like Gerald Clark kind of has, it's a very informative and I feel at times well-educated book, but it does sit a lot in over-sensationalized Judy and it focuses a lot on her romantic relationships and her sexual habits, which I'm like, why do we need to know all of this information? But yeah, he tells the story of Margaret O'Brien. Okay, so I heard a commentary by Margaret O'Brien and I read the book. Margaret O'Brien said that halfway through the shooting, Margaret's mother got the schedule for the rest of the film and she stormed up to Louis B. Mayer's office. She was like, this is ridiculous. You cannot overwork my daughter like this. And he said, you'll do exactly what you're told. So she pulled her out of the film and they went to South America for a little while to rest, but ended up going to New York where Lowe's Incorporated, who owned MGM, was located. And she went to Nicholas Schenck, I believe was his name, who was the head of Lowe's Incorporated, and said, if you want to keep working my daughter like this, you are going to pay us more money. So she got the pay raise and then they got start production back on. But you were also talking about the illnesses. Well, and for one, Judy, I mean, she never needed honestly more than one take, and that's the person she was. I feel like when she finally got into the role of Esther, it just came naturally, like everything else did for her. But I know, there was a time I've read several places where she just completely lost her ability to sleep. And when you're a movie star and you're required to be on the set at 5 a.m. in the morning, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, that's very stressful if you look absolutely exhausted. And, she was on uppers and downers, and you take too many uppers and downers and you lose your ability to sleep. And so I know that's one reason why she was late. And she had to call the AD lots of times and say, I will not be in today because I cannot sleep. And she called Arthur Freed several times. But I know there was a sinus infection that ran rampant through Meet Me in St. Louis and added lots of days onto the shooting schedule. But Mary Astor, who played the mother, she eventually got pneumonia and was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And then Joan Carroll, who played Agnes, got an emergency appendectomy. So she was out for several weeks. Harry Davenport, I can't remember what happened to him, but he was just old, and old people in the 1940s didn't live for very long. I don't think anybody lived very long, but I know he was constantly out due to some different illness. But yes, it was, I would think for the type of movie that they were shooting, that had to be a very, very stressful set for Minnelli to be like, okay, I've set this goal this high and we have to come in and do this every day, but everybody's getting sick. I'm having, Judy doesn't exactly trust me. And yeah, talking about Judy, this book by Gerald Clark, talked about her relationship with Tom Drake. And okay, did you know that the boy next door was supposed to first be played by Robert Walker, who starred opposite her in The Clock, which I think would have been wonderful. That would have been a different kind of boy next door. It would have been very, very.
That would have been added even more chaos to the set because he was a raging alcoholic.
Well, yes, and at that time, okay, so Robert Walker was boyfriend, girlfriend. His girlfriend was Jennifer Jones, who was under contract, who was a big movie star under contract to David O. Selznick. And he found out around this time, Robert Walker did, that Jennifer Jones and David O. Selznick were having an affair. And so that's one reason that perpetuated Robert Walker's alcoholism when he found out that Jennifer Jones was having an affair with David O. Selznick. Yeah, it would have been absolutely crazy. Another choice, Robert Walker didn't work out, and then they went to Van Johnson. And Van, I don't know why he wasn't. I mean, he would have been the great boy next door too. It almost seems like for what you need in the boy next door, Van Johnson would have been a little bit too much. Have you seen anything with Van Johnson before?
No, I haven't.
Okay. He was in like some of her later films, like In the Good Old Summertime, Till the Clouds Roll By. I think he only made two or three films with her. But then they finally got to Tom Drake, who was brand new to the studio. And so was Lucille Bremer. Lucille Bremer was there because she was Arthur Freed's protege, in quotes. I've heard many places that she and Arthur Freed were hooking up on many, many different levels. And that's why she got the 2 or 3 years of the studio that she did. But Tom Drake, according to Get Happy, Gerald Clark, Tom Drake, like many men in Hollywood was a closeted homosexual. And so Judy latched onto him. And when they tried to consummate the relationship, he could not perform. And she took that as a great insult to her. So she shut him out after that. But also, John Fricke has written that they stayed great friends throughout the years, and that when she was taping one of her television shows in the early 1960s, he was in the audience. She brought Tom Drake up to the stage and said, "This is my boy next door," and sang the boy next door to him, and it was all very sweet and whatnot. So, you really don't know who to believe, do you?
No, and it looks like we did a lot of the same research.
Yeah,
because I read those same exact stories. Except I didn't know about the Clark stuff. I didn't know about that, but I did know all the different boys next door. The Tom Drake coming on to her show in the 60s.
I mean, I've talked a little bit about like why this film is so important. I just have to say on this podcast, because every person I talk to about Meet Me in St. Louis, this is one of the very first films I can ever remember seeing. Like, I've been watching old movies with my grandparents since I was 3 or 4 years old. And it's not one of those things that you remember a first time. It's just always been there, like your parents or your grandparents or siblings or something like that. And I think, I felt in love with it because it's a very, very comfortable film to watch if you're part of a big family and you have that in your life. Also, some people could be like, well, there's just a bunch of privileged white people, living a highfalutin life in St. Louis in 1904. But that's besides the point. I mean, I think the point that Minnelli and Freed were trying to make was, even if this is not how the past looked, this is how the past should have been, which gave people an even greater warmth. And it's the evolution of a family over a year. And to say that it doesn't have a plot is like to say that our lives don't have plot or they don't have a point like big families don't. So anyway, I have to say about that, but I did want to talk a little bit about, I mean, I have some notes over the development of it, and it came out of like Sally Benson's stories, she published her short stories in a magazine. Arthur Freed read them, Arthur Freed bought them, and then he went through lots of different screenwriters before he could find two under contract at Metro that actually wrote something that he liked. But then also there were all of these little subplots that they had to cut out. Did you know that Lucille Brimmer was supposed to have a very large love interest in the film, played by Hugh Marlowe, who was in All About Eve, the Colonel? Have you read some of this?
Yeah. And there was a plot where Esther is trying to set her up with the Colonel and hides in a closet and ends up getting arrested.
Yes, and then there's this big lawsuit. I mean, in the film, there's supposed to be this big lawsuit against the family. And they were grasping at straws, I feel like, some of the screenwriters to be like, this film has no plot. We have to
how do we make it dramatic?
Exactly. How do we give it some sort of a conflict? But I mean, it was the entire plot. The entire conflict to the film is there's no place like home, which Arthur Freed loved. And he was one of the people that was kind of got Wizard of Oz on the road with producer Morvan Leroy, even though Arthur Freed is not credited for that film. But he loved the idea of a big family. And it seems like conflict enough to me. I don't know about other people. I love this movie so much, and I talk to other people about it. I'm like, I just feel like I watched the entire thing with rose-colored glasses. Like, I don't know any better, that it is just a beautiful movie. But talking a little bit about like Vincent Minnelli, in Chasing Rainbows, it probably doesn't even bring him up because it's about the younger Judy.
No, yeah. I mean, he's not even, I don't even think he's working at MGM yet at that point. But Roger Edens, who did the musical adaptations for the movie, was Judy's longtime vocal coach. And there's we have a lot to do with him in the show.
That's awesome. And I mean, I love Roger Edens because he did a lot of the arrangements. He was her vocal coach for movies and movies on top of movies going into the 1960s. But do you know much about Roger Edens working on Meet Me in St. Louis? That's one thing in the commentary that John Fricke didn't mention much
of. Not really. And in the books that I have, there's like, I think one photo of him in reference to Meet Me in St. Louis. So I don't think he really had that much to do with this movie. I think he was more, he did the arrangements and stuff and then was just sort of, out of the picture.
Right. Well, and at this time also, Kay Thompson, who was Liza's godmother, had come to, I think she'd come off of Broadway, had recently come to Metro. And she, from what I've read, she was a little bit too eccentric for Arthur Freed. So they did not put her under contract as an actress, but he put her under contract as a vocal arranger, which she had done a lot in the past. And she was a great performer on Broadway. So I know that at this point, a lot of Judy's gestures, just how she sold a song, was primarily influenced by Kay Thompson. And, Kay Thompson was under contract at MGM in the mid-1940s. So I don't even know if Roger Edens had as much to do with this film as he did with Judy's previous films.
That seems to be what was going on. Because even in the story of her showing up late to record, it was Kay Thompson who asked her if she wanted to run through the song.
Right.
So I think she was the one who was there on set with her.
Yes. And more than likely. And I would, from what I've read, she had, just several people that she really, really trusted that she kept close to her at all times. And Kay Thompson was one of them because she became Liza's godmother eventually. And for people wondering really who Kay Thompson is, she played the fashion designer in Funny Face with Audrey Hepburn and Fred Astaire in 1957, which I believe Roger Edens had something to do with. Well, MGM had something to do with that because they put the entire film together and then Paramount wouldn't let them have Audrey Hepburn. So then they sold the entire product to Paramount Pictures. But talking about Paramount Pictures, and you chime in whenever you want to, Ruby. I don't want to hog all of this time because I know you have some great facts too. And that's why we're here, to share these little stories. But Vincent Minnelli he's one of my favorite directors for Metro, because he directed so many great musicals, and several great comedies and melodramas in the late 50s, early 60s at Metro. But he was one that was, the composition, the visual composition was always going to be beautiful. He was going to pack it with details, pack it with color, and then arrange it in a way that was just breathtaking to look at. And I feel like he was one that was fully enveloped in high art. He wanted to bring that to musicals in all of his films as well. But he was, I think, about 22 years older than Judy. And he had first worked, I believe, at department stores in Chicago dressing windows out. So, first and foremost, that's where he got his eye for composition, was dressing these giant windows in a Chicago department store. But then he went on to New York and he directed numbers. He directed Broadway shows. He directed giant Folly numbers at Radio City Music Hall, which you can see some of the influence of those Folly numbers later in his films, like Ziegfeld Follies and American in Paris. And he was also a scenic designer. And I know Arthur Freed had brought him to MGM around 1940-41, but he had worked at Paramount Pictures for a short while in the 1930s, and they had tried to get him to direct musicals because he was such a big deal on Broadway and at Radio City Music Hall. And that didn't pan out because Minnelli said he did not like working at Paramount, so he went back to Broadway. Then Arthur Freed brought him to MGM, and he had him direct several different musical numbers in, like, Strike Up the Band, I think Babes in Arms, Babes on Broadway. Well, not Babes in Arms because he wasn't there yet. But, like, he directed one of Lena Horne's first musical numbers in a musical adaptation called Panama Hattie. And also Freed just paid him, musical producer Arthur Freed just paid him to walk around the lot all day and go watch rehearsals and the filming of their musicals so he could learn how to make film musicals, which would be just like a dream job for me. I was like, I wish somebody would pay me to go watch them make MGM musicals. But yeah, that's one of the very first things he did. Was he was just paid, he was put under contract to go watch them make musicals, which I think is absolutely fascinating. But he was also definitely a character. He was very shy, but he always dressed very, very well. And I know one of the very first films he went to go watch them film was a Shirley Temple movie. The only movie Shirley Temple did at MGM. He showed up with a full face of makeup, which shocked all the women, on the set. And so, Catherine Grayson was always like, he's just not somebody, he's not marrying material, is what the women would call him. And then, of course, when Judy got wind of these rumors, she said, well, I can change him. Which, anyway, it was a different time, as you well know.
Yes, and she was often attracted to closeted gay men. So, because yes. her father was a closeted gay man, and he died when she was 13, only a couple months after she signed her contract with MGM. So it's sort of, she sort of spent her life looking for him and other people.
Right. Well, yes, I would definitely think that. And I mean, yeah, I know her father, they had one of the reasons that Ethel and Judy left California was because they had kind of been run out because her father ran a movie theater in Grand Rapids. And this is, nasty, nasty stuff in the Get Happy book, but he was caught more than once doing stuff with young boys in the back of the movie theater. And so finally they were kind of shunned and run out of Grand Rapids.
That's why they left Minnesota. And then that's partly why Judy and her mother went and moved to Los Angeles from Antelope Valley as well. They had to sell the house and he was sleeping in the movie theater.
Right. Well, and yeah, that's very sad. And I don't think that she was completely aware of that, probably.
No, not at the time.
No. And I don't know if she was ever aware of that. But yeah, she was, to come back to the point that you were making, she was very much attracted to closeted gay men. And closeted gay men are still attracted to her, aren't they?
To this day.
To this day. All gay men okay, in the book Get Happy, of course, I keep telling you how nasty it is. It is nasty. It made several interesting points, though, because like we were talking, she had never played the ingenue, beautiful leading strawberry blonde ingenue like Esther Smith. She had always been the quirky girl with a wry sense of humor that was Mickey Rooney's best friend. And she had gotten married in 41 or 42 to a man named David Rose. And he had his own orchestra. He composed like easy listening, like Holiday for Strings was one of his pieces. He was in his early 30s. She was like 18 or 19. Have you heard about David Rose? What a character.
Oh, I don't know much about him, but other than that,
Yeah.
he was her first husband. Yeah.
Yes, and he was obsessed with trains. So when they got married, they bought a big house in California, and he laid train tracks throughout like their living room, their house, and out on their front lawn. And he had a little miniature train that you would see at a children's amusement park. And after working every day, he would just come home and ride that train on the tracks around and around and around. And he would invite friends over just to ride that train. And that's how he blew off steam. He didn't play golf. He didn't play a sport. He didn't listen to the radio or go to the races. He just rode his train, which I knew was very frustrating for her. And the fact that he was a very much older, more kind of, he was definitely an introvert and she was more extroverted, and they just did not get along. And another reason that relationship did not work out was because she did get pregnant and he did not want a baby. Ethel did not want her to have a baby, and neither did Louis B. Mayer. So after she found out she was pregnant, you might have heard this story, but Ethel went to Judy and said, Judy, this cannot happen. David doesn't want it. You have a very busy work schedule. You cannot take care of a baby. And I know Judy loved children, and that's one of the reasons she got married to him, even though she could see that it might not work out for all time. She was like, at least I get to have a baby. And I know Ethel took her to a clinic outside of Los Angeles, and they aborted it. And that was kind of a nail in their coffin for the relationship, I feel like. But after that, I mean, she was in love with Artie Shaw at a different time. That was a sad story because he was in his late 20s. Does Artie Shaw pop up in Chasing Rainbows?
No, but I think the Artie Shaw thing happened before she married David Rose. I think that's what sort of pushed her into, because he just ran off and eloped with Ava Gardner, I think.
Lana Turner.
Some beautiful some
Metro
beautiful woman at
bimbo.
MGM. And I think they did have a relationship, and then she finds out that he eloped in the news basically. And that's sort of what pushed her to David Rose.
Well, and David Rose, okay, so this is going back a little bit because Judy was 15 or 16 at the time that she was in a relationship sort of with Artie Shaw, and he was in his late 20s. And when Judy found out in the news, she had to that day go on to Bob Hope's radio show, which she did every Tuesday night. And David Rose and singer Margaret Whiting were the two people that comforted Judy after she found out about Artie. So then she latched on to David Rose because he had been there to comfort her. He felt very, very comfortable. But after so now we're going to jump back into after David Rose's relationship, while that was still fizzling out and they were trying to get a divorce, which took a long time in California in those days. It might still, I don't know. I've never tried to get a divorce in California, but she met and fell in love with Tyrone Power. He was married to a French actress. They got along very well. Orson Welles for just a hot second. And then I know that, and this may not exactly be in order, but by the time that she was in talks for Meet Me in St. Louis, by the time Freed came to her and said, this will be your next picture, she was dating Joseph L. Mankiewicz, the Joseph L. Mankiewicz, writer, producer, director of All About Eve and Letter to Three Wives and Barefoot Contessa, some of Hollywood's biggest and best films. And at that point, he was a producer at Metro. He had also worked as a writer. He wanted to work as a director. And he had gotten an offer from Fox with more money to be writer, producer, director. And he had dated a lot of glamour girls at Metro, but he stated that they were all superficial compared to Judy. She was like this raw, pulsing nerve of emotion, one of the most interesting people he had ever met. He, at the time, was married, but his wife had gone, his wife was undergoing psychoanalysis in another state because she had had a severe emotional breakdown. So he started this love affair with Judy, and Judy told her sister, you probably know this, well, he's the most interesting man I've ever met. Judy, at this point, For Me and My Gal, presenting Lily Mars were two of her first adult roles, and she really liked that. And so when Freed came to her and said, well, you're going to play this teenage girl next door, she's like, no, not again. And Makowitz even said, this is not good for your career, because now you're backtracking back into the Andy Hardy series, which, you know, she didn't want to be looked at that like that anymore by critics. And even I think in 1940, with Strike Up the Band, critics had started to say Miss Garland is growing into this beautiful young woman. Why don't you start using her as such? And so Makowitz had told her, Makowitz had actually written a script for her, which was called The Pirate, which she ended up doing in 1947. 1947-48. Yeah, you roll your eyes when I say that. Whew, that was... have you heard about
Isn't
the making
that
of that
Minnelli
movie?
Too?
That is Minnelli.
Yeah.
And it's Gene Kelly. And it is gorgeous to look at. It is
but it's really bad.
It's
really not great.
The finished product ended up being a lot different than what they originally had planned. Judy was they had to cut out so many musical numbers for Judy because she had just gotten off of maternity leave with Liza, and she had just cold turkey stopped all of her pills, all of the alcohol, cigarettes, and then just picked it up immediately. She did not want to be at the studio. And that's another thing we can talk about, an interesting article from 44-45 with Judy. But yeah, she didn't want to be at the studio. She was not at the top of her game. Gene Kelly, Vincent Minnelli, Gene Kelly said later they formed their own boys club that they kept Judy out of because they were trying to create something so big and beautiful and high art that they lost track of what they were really trying to create. But what was I talking? Oh yes, Makowitz had written a script for her of The Pirate, which she wanted to do. Freed, and I think the script that they worked on later was not written by Makowitz, because what happened was Judy said, I do not want to do this picture. And then on top of that, Makowitz had suggested to Judy that she undergo psychoanalysis every morning before she go to the studio. And you might have heard this story before, but she ended up going through psychoanalysis for several months, which caused in Judy Garland a rise in individualism. And Ethel Gum noticed it first. And, Judy had always been the good little girl who did what she was told by Mr. Mayer and Ethel Gum. And Judy started questioning everything Ethel was telling her to do. And why do I need to do this? Why do I need to do this? Why do I need to overwork myself? So Ethel found out about Joe Makowitz saying you need to undergo psychoanalysis. And then so she went to Mr. Mayer and she said, now this isn't going to work out because it's not going to work out. And so Mayer called in Makowitz to his office and said, now this has to stop, Joe. She can't continue to do this. And Joe Makowitz was like, well, she's a very, very sick little girl. She needs, some sort of help, and you can't just control her. She is not your puppet. Joe Makowitz stormed out of the office. They didn't say anything until several weeks later. They were both on the train from New York to Los Angeles, and Mayer and Makowitz bumped into each other. And Mayer said, now you need to stop this with Judy. You can't do this anymore with Judy. And Makowitz said Mayer went on this long rant about patriotism and a woman's role in society and a man's role in society. And, you are my worker and you should do as I'm told. And then Makowitz said, after Louis B. Mayer was finished, he said, that is just the ravings of a jealous old man. And so Makowitz, it was kind of, he just walked away from the studio. And 2 weeks later, he was over working at 20th Century Fox for more money and where he could direct, write, and produce. So part of the reason that Judy was so pent up about not doing Meet Me in St. Louis with Joe Makowitz. Also, talking about Ethel Gum, did you know she was under contract to Metro to report to Mayer everything Judy did?
Yeah. And I know that she got paid. She had her own paycheck, and she made more than Judy did at early on.
Really?
Yeah. Not that Judy's money didn't go directly to her anyway. But
right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I feel like I'm kind of making you cringe now. You're like, oh, this is all the bad stuff, all the bad memories. But I mean, it's just very interesting how this all came together with Judy and Joe Mankiewicz of all people, and Ethel Gum and Louis B. Mayer. For me, it's very interesting, and the original script had all of these different subplots in it. That Judy thought were silly and ridiculous as well. Thank you for listening to the Hollywood Babylonians. You have been listening to the Hollywood Babylonians. The Hollywood Babylonians is produced, edited, and hosted by Ben Berg and co-hosted by Ruby Rakos. Audio engineering by Andrew Davis with artwork by Ben Berg and Jamie Lee. If you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, and follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at the Hollywood Babylonians for more Hollywood Babylonians content. Tune in next Friday, December 22nd, as we continue to discuss Meet Me in St. Louis and Judy Garland with star of Paper Mill Playhouse's production of Chasing Rainbows, The Road to Oz, Ruby Rakos. Thank you for listening and have a good night.